Welcome back, everybody. We are delighted to bring in one of our favorite guests, founder of PatriotAcademy.com, Rick Green. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Amanda, John, good to be back with you.
Good to have you here. And, you know, these days it feels like we live in an upside down world. Up is down, left is right, black is white. And of the 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights, the only one that says shall not be infringed, that's the one that Joe Biden says is not absolute. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and for those people that wonder whether the Second Amendment's an individual right or a group right, they need to zero in on that part that says the right of the people shall not be infringed. And our founder certainly advocated that. One of them people aren't very familiar with, St. George Tucker, he said, anytime you, under any color or pretext whatsoever, infringe upon the right to keep and bear arms, that liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. Joseph Story was father of American jurisprudence, and he said that this one, it's the palladium of all of our other liberties. It's the protector of everything else. So when they start talking about infringing upon it, we need to have a really good discussion about what the issue really is. It's not the gun. We know that. They'll use knives. They'll use cars. They'll use rocks, bombs, whatever they can get their hands on. We've always had mass murders. Most of the time, governments have been the ones to commit those mass murders. There's always been evil, and we need to recognize evil is evil, good is good, and we need more sheepdogs to protect the sheep from these wolves. That's the real answer here.
Yeah, we really do. And it starts with maybe better educating our young generations. I think there's a generation or two that got fed a lot of baloney in school from their teachers, and they don't believe the First Amendment or the Second Amendment important. That's why they're willing to accept censorship and the rescission of gun rights. What can be done now to make sure the current generation in schools get a better grounding in the Constitution and the intentions of our founding fathers?
Well, I hate to be self-promoting, but PatriotAcademy.com, for one, for adults and young people, actually. You know, our generation needs it too, right? I mean, we've got multiple generations that came through a school system that no longer teaches civics, certainly doesn't teach it well, kind of buries it. Maybe you get a little bit in 5th grade or 8th grade, but we ought to be spiraling that every year, teaching the Declaration and the Constitution. And so we train young people. I'm in Colorado doing our first Patriot Academy here in Colorado, but we do state capitals across the nation, been doing that for 20 years. And it's really an opportunity to put these young people in the hot seat as a legislator and make them think about issues like this one today. You know, what is the right way to protect our kids at schools? Is it all about trying to prevent someone from getting a firearm, which is impossible in the long run? Or is it about making sure that we have armed people everywhere ready to defend? And when I say people, I don't mean just police. That's another thing the young people need to learn. The police can't protect you every minute of every day, everywhere. And that's why the founding fathers believed in an armed citizenry, we the people. And John, Amanda, just compare what happened Tuesday in my home state of Texas in Uvalde, as you mentioned in the previous segment, for over an hour. This crazy guy was able to kill children. The next day, there was a crazy guy in West Virginia that wanted to kill a whole crowd of people, but there was an armed, what I call sheepdog with a ponytail. There was a lady there with her concealed weapon. She was trained, and she was able to take out the threat within seconds because of the proximity of a good guy or gal with a gun, trained good guy or gal with a gun, to the bad guy. If you don't have that proximity, you can send in SEAL Team 6, and by the time they get there, lives will be lost.
Great point.
Yeah, but that story is not sexy enough for the mainstream news. They've got to go with the other narrative. But speaking of narratives, I wanted to ask you, because we were talking with Colonel Alan West in the A Block about the left's reaction, the right's reaction to these things, and Beto O'Rourke at that, or excuse me, Robert Francis O'Rourke at that press conference. And there are some factions of the left that I think really want to hammer down on gun control. But there's an interesting thing happening right now. You know, when Democrats rush to go to the gun control conversation, that doesn't seem to line up with the registrations for gun permits and the stories like you just talked about and the defensive uses of guns. It doesn't really seem to line up with the Democrats' narrative. So does the gun control argument for mainstream Democrats and mainstream Democrat voters, does it still work?
I don't think so, man. I think it's a losing argument for them this year. If you look at the Trafalgar poll with Convention of States that they just did, I think it was today or yesterday, you know, the majority of people, both Republican and Democrat, are saying, hey, we want armed teachers. We want armed people in schools. It's more guns, less crime, not less guns. When you have less guns, you get more crime. We know the stats, you know, over the decades, 500,000 to even 4 million times a year, guns are used to stop crime. Now, I'm a big advocate of training, not just go out and buy a gun, but actually get some good professional training from someone in your community or come to one of our constitutional defense courses. But I do think this is a losing argument for the left. I mean, Joe Biden is right now saying he wants to get rid of 9mm because he thinks that's crazy that those are necessary for self-defense. That's the number one option for self-defense, especially for the ladies. I mean, he just doesn't understand what it takes to defend ourselves and our families. Americans do get that, and they understand they want a good guy or gal with a gun to be close by if the wolf shows up. So I do think it's a losing argument for the left at this point. But the right has to articulate it and not cave. A lot of the Republicans are even starting to play around with some of these ideas that are actually infringing on the Second Amendment because they want to sound like they're being neutral or that they're finding middle ground. They're actually headed down the wrong path, and that'll cause Republicans to lose as well.
Yeah, that's an important warning. Rick, we've had Parkland, we've had Virginia Tech, we've had Columbine, and there's been a stalemate in Washington. There's been no real meaningful advance in trying to stop sick or evil people from doing these things. How do we break the deadlock? How do we get some consensus? What can conservatives do to maybe find a solution that moves the ball in this?
Yeah, I think they have to start by stepping back and saying, in the context of history and the nature of man, what's the real problem? It's not an inanimate object. It's actually the heart of man, and there's always going to be evil. We've had mass murders throughout time. Usually it was government committing it, but sometimes a crazed individual as well. And then knowing that, what's the best way to minimize that evil? How do you stop that evil as quick as possible? So the whole debate in Congress and in state legislatures should be, how do you decrease the time that a dedicated killer has from the time he or she starts that action to the time someone with superior firepower stops them? If it's a short amount of time, literally seconds, like in West Virginia, the only person that dies is the bad guy. I like those headlines. If it's a long amount of time, 5 minutes at Buffalo, 10 minutes at Parkland, an hour and a half nearly at Uvalde, then you're going to have a lot of carnage. So all of the policies should be aimed at decreasing that time, which means making it easier and maybe even funding the training for teachers and staff, maybe even funding the firearm for them if they want to participate. I'm not for forcing people, obviously, to go through that. But if we had one person on each hallway, let's say in a school, that was armed and trained, that would certainly decrease the time that these people could wreak their havoc.
Yeah, look, we're a country founded on state militias, so it wouldn't hurt my feelings one bit if we went back at least a little bit in that direction. But Rick, we appreciate you joining us with the PatriotAcademy.com. Everybody go check it out. It's definitely worth your while. Rick, good to see you. And